High in the rain-soaked mountains of Montana, a single gunshot shattered the quiet forest and changed everything. A hunter's bullet tore into a grizzly mother's shoulder as her two cubs cried out, and what happened next defied every instinct of fear or mercy. A wounded giant vanished into the shadows, leaving a trail of blood and a haunting choice that would push strangers to risk everything against time, nature, and a relentless pursuer. This is a story you will never forget. And before we start, take a second to like this video and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The first thing you notice in those northern Montana highlands is how alive the air feels. Every breath carries pine resin, distant smoke from someone's wood stove, and that crisp wetness that tells you a storm is circling somewhere far off. Evelyn Markham had spent years guiding hikers through these forests, not because it was easy money, because it was the only thing that made her heart feel steady again. She was 47, a widow who had learned to pour her grief into the rhythm of boots on moss and the quiet companionship of towering firs. That morning had started like any other. She was walking two guests from a Seattle photography club along a narrow creek bed, cracking quick jokes to calm their nerves about bear country. She even told them, half smiling, that most bears would rather run from you than look at you. But even as she said it, her instincts kept her scanning the treeline, because the forest never truly plays by rules. Then the echo hit, a rifle shot so sharp and sudden it punched the breath right out of her lungs. Birds exploded from branches. The creek rippled in chaos, and the two hikers froze with eyes wide. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs as she turned, searching the misted slope beyond the ferns. And then she saw him, a lone hunter in camo stepping out from behind a pine, lowering his rifle with a grin that made her stomach twist. Her eyes followed the hunter's line of sight, and that's when her world stopped. A massive grizzly mother stood 100 yards away, flanked by two small cubs that pressed close against her legs. But something was wrong, horribly wrong. The bear's shoulder fur was darkening with fresh blood, her breathing ragged, her head lowering in confusion and pain. Evelyn knew this bear. Over seasons she had seen her from afar, watched her raise litters, watched her fish these creeks like it was sacred work. She was more than wildlife. She was a survivor, a silent teacher in these woods. Evelyn felt something ancient flare inside her, something raw and protective that drowned out reason. The hunter reloaded, smirking, ready to claim his trophy. And in that frozen second, Evelyn understood the bear wasn't going to run. The mother looked around, eyes blazing with a strange mix of terror and fury, and then locked her gaze with Evelyn. It was a look that slammed through Evelyn's chest like a physical blow, a look that said she would fight to her last breath for those cubs. Then the impossible happened. Instead of lunging at the man with the gun, the mother bear suddenly threw her weight to one side, knocking both cubs toward the treeline, and charged. Not at the hunter, but straight into the deep timber, dragging her wounded body and leaving a trail of blood that shimmered dark against the moss. Evelyn's throat tightened. Every part of her screamed to do nothing, to keep her clients safe, to wait for rangers. But her boots were already moving, tearing through brush, heart hammering so hard it hurt. She shouted over her shoulder, voice breaking, telling the hikers to stay put and call for help. Her legs carried her downhill, faster than her thoughts, through ferns and slick roots, adrenaline roaring in her ears. She knew this was reckless. She knew a wounded bear could kill her in an instant. But that image of the mother's eyes burned through every ounce of fear. Evelyn wasn't chasing a bear. She was chasing a promise, to herself, to the wild she loved, to the idea that sometimes you don't walk away when life is bleeding out in front of you. And somewhere in those shadows ahead, the wounded mother moved deeper, her cubs crying after her, while far behind, the hunter's voice rose again through the trees, sharp and angry, like he had no intention of letting his prize escape. Evelyn kept running, because some moments don't wait. Some moments demand everything you have, even when your heart knows you might not make it back. Evelyn tore through the undergrowth with reckless speed, the wet ferns slapping against her jeans, leaving streaks of sap and mud. Her breath was already sharp in her throat, but that red trail ahead pushed her forward. It wasn't just blood. It was a story being written in the dirt, a mother's desperate fight to stay ahead of death. Every few steps she caught sight of paw prints, deep and dragging, and smaller ones weaving close beside them. The cubs weren't just following. They were glued to her, terrified, like they knew the world had suddenly turned against them. Her mind fired through memories like lightning. The first time she'd seen this bear 2 summers ago, standing in the river shallows, batting at salmon like it was a dance. The hikers had gasped and whispered, and Evelyn had smiled because she could feel the pulse of something eternal. Now, that same pulse felt like it was slipping away right in front of her. A branch cracked behind her and her heart nearly launched out of her chest. She spun, fists clenched, ready for anything, only to see one of the hikers peeking from behind a spruce, phone in hand. He yelled that he'd called the rangers. She barked at him to go back and stay put, her tone sharp enough to make him flinch. This wasn't a guided trail anymore. This was hers alone. The drizzle thickened into rain, making the pine needles glisten like glass. Evelyn skidded down a slick embankment, boots splashing through a shallow stream, her jacket catching on thorns. She yanked herself free and climbed the opposite side, every muscle in her body screaming. But then she heard it, a sound that carved straight through her soul. A low, guttural moan, half growl, half cry, echoing between the trees. She slowed her pace, senses wide open. The air smelled of earth and iron, heavy with danger. Ahead, the terrain narrowed into a gorge, walls rising steep and damp, ferns hanging like curtains. At the center, a fallen cedar spanned the gap, a natural bridge slick with moss. And there she was, the mother bear, slumped against a boulder, head low, blood dripping steadily from her shoulder onto the dark stone. One cub was pressed against her, trembling. The other paced in tight circles, whining softly. Evelyn stepped closer, boots crunching twigs, and crouched low. She whispered without thinking, her voice barely more than breath. The bear's ears twitched, her dark eyes rolling toward Evelyn. And for one heart-piercing second, the air felt electric with trust and terror tangled together. Evelyn's chest burned with an ache she hadn't felt in years. She slipped off her jacket and tore strips from the lining, pressing them against the wound with shaking hands. The bear flinched, lips curling in a weak snarl, but she didn't strike. That almost broke Evelyn in two. The cubs whimpered louder, noses nudging their mother, their tiny claws scrabbling at the damp ground. Evelyn's thoughts raced. She couldn't carry this animal, not alone. And the hunter wouldn't give up. She could almost feel him out there in the rain, watching, reloading, calculating. The smell of blood would travel. Wolves, coyotes, maybe even another bear. Time was shrinking, and every instinct told her she was about to make a choice that could cost her life. Her hand lingered on the bear's thick fur as she swallowed back a sob. The storm above them rumbled, wind slicing through the gorge, carrying the echo of a distant boot step. She snapped her head toward the sound, eyes narrowing. Someone was coming. Not the hikers, not the rangers. The rhythm of those steps felt heavier, more certain. She rose slowly, fists clenching, breath tight in her chest. The cubs pressed deeper into their mother's fur. The gorge suddenly felt like a trap, walls too steep, escape routes dwindling. Evelyn knew she needed help. But what if the person arriving wasn't here to help at all? She took a step back, heart pounding so loud she barely heard the next crunch of gravel behind her. Then a voice spoke her name, quiet, disbelieving, like a ghost from her past. And when she turned, she saw him standing there in the rain, face lined with years and eyes wide with shock. Caleb Warren, an old ranger she hadn't seen since before her husband died. A man who had vanished from her life and now stood staring at the bleeding bear and the woman kneeling beside her like the world had flipped upside down. Evelyn couldn't even form words. Her mind was already screaming with questions, and yet, deep down, she knew the clock was still ticking, and whatever Caleb had come for, this bear's life was running out faster than either of them could imagine. Caleb's voice sounded rough, like it had been years since he last used it to say her name. Evelyn's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her heartbeat was still sprinting from the run, but now there was another rush layered over it. Disbelief, suspicion, a wild surge of hope that she immediately crushed down. She didn't have time for old ghosts. Caleb stepped closer, palms open, eyes flicking from her face to the bear slumped against the boulder. His lined features hardened with recognition as he saw the wound, the trembling cubs, and the makeshift bandage soaked through with fresh blood. He muttered something under his breath, a curse wrapped in a prayer. Evelyn snapped back to focus, blurting out the only words that mattered. "We have to move her. We don't have time." His brow furrowed. "Move her? Evelyn, you're out of your mind. That animal will rip your arm off the second she wakes up enough to understand you're touching her." Evelyn didn't blink. "She's bleeding out, Caleb. You think I'm going to just stand here and let her die?" Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, scanning the gorge walls. Rain pattered against his hat brim, dripping down his coat. He still carried that old revolver on his hip, but his hand never moved toward it. Instead, he crouched beside her, his voice low and taut with urgency. "There's an outpost a mile downriver. It's old, but it's stocked. First aid, tarps, maybe even something to stabilize her. But a mile with that weight, in this weather, with whoever fired that shot still out here." Evelyn's laugh was bitter and sharp. "I don't care if it's 10 miles. She can't stay here. Look at her." Caleb looked, and for a moment something in his own chest softened. He had seen enough wounded animals to know when it was over, and yet there was something in this bear's eyes, even half-closed and fading, that defied that grim knowledge. He dragged in a breath, then nodded once, hard. They scavenged fast. Caleb used his knife to cut branches from the fallen cedar, his movements quick and efficient. Evelyn tore the rest of her jacket into strips, binding them into crude ties. All the while the cubs watched, their small sides heaving with rapid breaths, eyes darting between human and mother like they were trying to calculate trust on instincts alone. When they slid the branches under her, the bear twitched, a low growl rumbling from her throat. Caleb flinched back, muttering that this was suicide. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She pressed her palm against the thick fur, whispering again, the same way she had whispered through nights alone when grief had nearly eaten her alive. The growl faded, replaced by another ragged breath. Caleb stared at her like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. The weight when they lifted was staggering. The branches creaked, the binding strained, and Evelyn's muscles screamed as she took the rear end. Caleb grunted, adjusting his stance, and for a second they almost tipped. The bear groaned, legs dangling, her head lolling, and Evelyn felt a surge of terror. This could kill her faster. But standing still was worse. Step by step they pushed forward, every inch an argument against giving up. Rain slicked the path, roots caught their boots, and twice Evelyn nearly went to her knees. Caleb muttered calculations aloud. How far, how long, how bad it would get after dark. But each time he stole a glance at Evelyn's face, her jaw clenched, eyes blazing, and he shut up. They barely made it 50 yards when a sound froze them both. Heavy footfalls, deliberate, echoing through the trees above. Caleb's hand went to his revolver. Evelyn's grip tightened on the stretcher. The cubs whimpered, pressing closer. And then came a sound that drained all the heat from Evelyn's body. A laugh. That same hunter's low, mocking laugh, carrying through the rain like a promise. Caleb hissed under his breath. He's following us. Evelyn's pulse thudded in her ears. They were trapped between a predator and a bleeding mother who couldn't defend herself. And then Caleb's eyes darted up the slope, scanning the ridge. He leaned in, voice quick and sharp. We need to move now. If he gets a clear shot down here, it's over for all of us. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Her boots dug into the slick earth, and together they pushed deeper into the forest, each step a gamble, each sound behind them a fresh spike of terror. And above it all, the steady, painful rhythm of the bear's breathing was the only thing keeping Evelyn from collapsing. Because as long as that sound existed, there was still something left to fight for. Rain sheeted through the canopy as Evelyn and Caleb dragged the makeshift stretcher over tangled roots and jagged rocks, every muscle in their bodies burning. The wounded grizzly's weight was relentless, her massive form shifting with each uneven step, yet Evelyn's grip only tightened. Every grunt from the bear was a countdown, every stumble a reminder that time was running out. Caleb muttered under his breath, part calculation, part raw panic, but he kept moving, shoulders hunched against the storm like a man fighting ghosts. Somewhere behind them, that hunter's presence stalked the air itself. Twigs cracked in rhythms that didn't belong to wind or wildlife. Evelyn could feel his gaze on the back of her neck, feel the pulse of danger weaving through the rain. Her mind raced through options, but none of them involved stopping. Stopping meant giving up, and giving up wasn't something she'd allowed herself in years. Not after losing so much already. A sudden slip nearly sent Caleb sprawling, the stretcher tilting dangerously. He caught himself with a curse, knees sinking into the mud, and Evelyn lunged forward to steady her side. They locked eyes for a heartbeat, an old familiarity sparking, something neither of them had words for. Then the bear groaned, and they pushed forward again. There was no room for sentiment when death was right on your heels. The cubs padded alongside, wet fur plastered against their sides, whining softly. They didn't stray, didn't scatter, just pressed close to their mother's stretcher, as if their tiny hearts knew that proximity was the only lifeline they had left. Evelyn spared a glance at them and felt a surge of something so raw it tightened her chest. These little lives didn't understand guns or hunters or human cruelty. They only understood loyalty, and that loyalty demanded she be better, faster, braver than she thought she could be. The forest deepened, the light thinning as dusk crept in, shadows growing long and sinister. Thunder growled overhead, and the slope turned steep, forcing them to lean into the stretcher with all their weight. Caleb's voice was tight. "We're heading straight into a drop, Evelyn." His words barely cut through the roar of the storm, but she heard him, eyes snapping up to the sharp ridge ahead. Beyond it, the land fell toward the river gorge, its roar already faintly audible. They didn't have the luxury of choosing an easier path. They couldn't circle back. That hunter's laugh drifted again, closer now, echoing through the wet pines. Evelyn's breath caught, and she shoved forward with a growl of her own. Caleb gritted his teeth, sweat and rain mixing on his face, and together they climbed. Near the top of the ridge, Caleb stumbled hard, a sharp rock tearing his palm. He swore, shaking the blood from his fingers, but didn't stop. Evelyn adjusted her stance, eyes darting to the bear. The great animal's eyes were half closed, her massive chest rising in shallow, shuddering motions. Evelyn's heart clenched. Not like this. Not after all of this. Then came a sound that froze them both. Rapid, crashing footfalls closing in through the underbrush. Caleb swung his head toward the noise, hand dropping instinctively to his revolver. A figure emerged through the ferns, tall and broad-shouldered, stepping into view with a deliberate calm that made Evelyn's skin prickle. For a split second she thought it was the hunter, but then the stranger raised a hand, palm out. His voice carried steady over the storm. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." Evelyn's muscles locked, her instincts screaming. Caleb didn't lower the gun. The man stepped closer, face visible now, older, weather-worn, with the kind of eyes that have seen too much wilderness. "My name's Harris Cole," he said, voice low but urgent. "I've been tracking her for 3 days. That bullet wasn't meant for her. I've been trying to keep her alive." The words hit like a jolt. Evelyn's brain scrambled, torn between relief and suspicion. Harris took another careful step, his gaze fixed on the bear. And for the first time, Evelyn saw something in a stranger's face she hadn't expected: genuine grief. Caleb's jaw tightened. "If you're lying, old man, you're done." Harris didn't flinch. "I'm not. But if you stay here, she is. There's an outpost past the gorge. You'll never make it alone. Let me help." The storm roared overhead, the hunter's distant shouts weaving through the trees. Evelyn met Caleb's eyes, her pulse hammering. They didn't have time to debate. They didn't have time for trust issues. They only had this one desperate chance to push forward, with a stranger's help, or watch everything they'd fought for end in the mud beneath their boots. Evelyn nodded once, sharp and decisive. Harris stepped in, gripping the stretcher with hands scarred by decades of wilderness. And together, 3 people bound by nothing but raw determination. They started moving again, deeper into the storm, deeper into danger, carrying a wounded mother whose heartbeat felt like the last flicker of hope left in that darkening forest. The river's voice grew louder with every labored step, a deep and restless roar threading through the downpour. Evelyn's shoulders burned from the weight of the stretcher, her fingers numb around the makeshift handles, but she refused to ease her grip. Harris moved at the front now, cutting a path through the dripping brush with a pace that was both urgent and steady, like a man who had learned the hard way what hesitation costs. Caleb brought up the rear, eyes darting back to the darkened tree-line every few seconds, his revolver loose in one hand as if danger itself was a shadow following them. The wounded mother let out a soft, broken groan. Evelyn's throat tightened, adrenaline spiking again. The cubs, soaked and trembling, kept brushing against her legs as they walked, and each time they did it felt like being stabbed with a reminder. If the mother dies, what chance do these little ones have? The thought was unbearable, so Evelyn turned it into fuel, pushing harder even as the trail began to angle sharply downward. Harris looked over his shoulder, shouting over the storm. "There's no other way. The old bridge is ahead." Evelyn squinted through the rain and saw it. An ancient wooden span, sagging and warped, stretching across a boiling rush of white water below. Half the planks were missing. The rails leaned outward like broken bones. Caleb swore under his breath, his voice tight. "That thing's not going to hold." Harris shot him a look. "It's either this or stay up here and let him catch up." Evelyn heard it then, boots striking wet earth in a rhythm that didn't belong to them. The hunter's voice cut through the storm, sharp and furious, closer now than it had ever been. A gunshot ripped the air, a splinter of bark exploding near Evelyn's shoulder. She gasped, ducking instinctively, the stretcher swaying dangerously. Harris growled, pushing forward. "Move!" They charged toward the bridge, wind whipping at them, rain making every step treacherous. Caleb fired a single warning shot back into the trees, the crack echoing off the gorge walls. Evelyn's lungs were on fire, but she kept her eyes locked on the bridge, calculating every step, already tasting the metallic terror on her tongue. The first footfall on the bridge sent a shiver through the boards. Harris tested it, then beckoned her on. Evelyn followed, gripping the stretcher tighter as they edged forward, wood groaning under the combined weight of them and the dying mother. The river surged below, dark and violent, promising no second chances. Halfway across, a plank cracked beneath Evelyn's boot, jerking her leg through the gap. Caleb lunged, steadying the back end, his knuckles white. The bear groaned again, head lolling toward the side, blood dripping through the slats into the raging current. Evelyn yanked her leg free, a flash of pain slicing through her knee, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Harris grunted, pushing harder, and then another gunshot split the storm. A bullet whined past so close that Evelyn felt the wind of it against her cheek. She gasped, ducked lower, and kept moving. Caleb shouted over the roar, his voice raw. "Keep going. Don't you dare stop now." The bridge swayed, every step a gamble, until finally Harris leapt off the far side, dragging the stretcher with him. Evelyn stumbled onto solid earth a heartbeat later, collapsing to her knees in the mud. Caleb followed, chest heaving, his face pale but set with grim fire. Behind them, the hunter reached the near edge of the bridge, his silhouette framed in the storm, rifle raised. But something changed in that instant. The mother bear, still alive, still bleeding, stirred on the stretcher. Her eyes opened, faint but burning, and the cubs whimpered louder, huddling against her. Evelyn felt her breath catch. There was no way back now, no way to undo what they'd done, and no guarantee they could outrun what was coming. Caleb crouched beside her, voice low and rough. "We have to keep moving." Harris pointed down the trail, urgency sharpening every word. "The outpost's less than half a mile. If we can make it, we've got a chance." Evelyn forced herself to stand, wiping rain and tears from her face with the back of her hand. Her legs trembled, but her grip on the stretcher was steady. Harris looked at her, then at Caleb, and for the first time that night there was something like hope in his eyes. The roar of the river faded behind them as they pushed on into the trees, their breaths coming in ragged bursts. The storm raged on, but somewhere ahead, beyond the next bend and through the twisting shadows, a faint glimmer of lantern light waited. And behind them, far back on that collapsing bridge, the hunter's silhouette vanished into the mist, only to reappear moments later as the sound of boots crunching wet gravel echoed once more through the dark. The trail twisted through towering pines that seemed to close in tighter with every step, their branches dripping cold rain onto Evelyn's neck and shoulders. Her arms ached from the stretcher, her boots squelched in thick mud, but adrenaline kept her moving. Harris led the way, eyes sharp, stepping over roots with practiced ease, while Caleb stayed behind her, revolver in hand, scanning the shadows as though the dark itself could bite. The bear stirred again, a low rasp rumbling from her chest. Evelyn felt it vibrate through the branches in her grip, a sound that cut straight through her exhaustion and lit that fire of purpose all over again. She leaned closer as they walked, whispering words she couldn't even remember, anything to keep the mother tethered to this world. The cubs stayed glued to the stretcher, tripping in the mud, letting out little high-pitched cries that only fueled Evelyn's rage at the hunter who had done this. They broke through a thick patch of ferns, and suddenly there it was, a shadowed structure tucked among the trees. The old ranger outpost, half hidden by decades of moss and ivy, lantern light flickering weakly through a cracked window. Evelyn almost sobbed in relief, though her knees still threatened to give way. Harris nodded grimly and pushed open the warped door. The smell of cedar and dust rushed out, a strange comfort in the chaos. Inside, the room was cramped but solid, wooden beams groaning under the weight of years. A cot sat against one wall, an old table scarred with knife marks in the corner, and a shelf lined with rusting tins and a battered medical kit. They lowered the stretcher carefully, the bear's massive frame nearly filling the cot. The cubs scrambled onto the bed frame, pressing close to their mother, and Evelyn wiped her face with her sleeve, trying to steady her shaking hands. Caleb rifled through the kit, pulling out rolls of bandage and a bottle of cloudy antiseptic. Harris leaned in, inspecting the wound with a grin set to his jaw. Bones splintered. That bullet's still in there. Evelyn's throat tightened. Then we get it out. Harris gave her a hard look. If we try and fail, she might bleed out faster. Evelyn's voice broke, raw and sharp. If we do nothing, she dies. For a long moment, the storm outside seemed to fall silent, the three of them caught in a triangle of fear and desperation. Caleb set down the kit with a sigh, rubbing his temple. I swore I'd never do something like this again. Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes blazing. Then why are you here, Caleb? His lips tightened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the lantern and set it closer to the cot. Harris took a deep breath, rolling up his sleeves to reveal old scars etched across his forearms. He began laying out tools, a pair of tweezers, a small folding knife, lengths of clean cloth. His movements methodical, though Evelyn could see the tremor in his hands. She pressed a rag to the bear's shoulder, feeling the faint but steady rhythm of life beneath her palms. Outside, the storm picked up, wind howling through the trees, rattling the shutters. Caleb moved to the door, peering out into the blackness. He didn't say anything, but Evelyn saw the way his shoulders tensed. The hunter wasn't done. He was still out there, stalking, waiting for his moment. Harris glanced up at Evelyn, his voice low, almost a whisper. Once we start, we finish. No stopping. No second chances. Evelyn nodded, her throat too tight for words. She reached for the bear's massive paw, gripping it gently, feeling the scarred pads beneath her fingers. The mother groaned again, her dark eyes half opening, fixing on Evelyn with a look so ancient and fierce it made her breath catch. Caleb shut the door, bolted it, and turned back to them, jaw set. Do it now. We don't have all night. Harris took up the knife, his face a mask of grim focus, and began to work as the lantern light flickered wildly in the rising wind. Outside, somewhere in the trees, a branch snapped, loud, deliberate. The hunter was close, and time was running out. The outpost was thick with tension, lantern light trembling across the walls as the storm outside howled like some ancient warning. Harris steadied his hands, the knife glinting faintly as he made the first careful incision around the bullet's entry. Evelyn held the bear's shoulder firm, feeling every labored breath reverberate through her arms, her own pulse thudding in her ears like war drums. Caleb stood by the bolted door, revolver ready, eyes flicking toward every shadow, every groan of the wind, like he expected the hunter to materialize out of thin air. The bear let out a deep, guttural growl, legs twitching, her claws scraping against the cot's wooden frame. Evelyn whispered to her, quick and steady, pouring raw emotion into each word. "You're not done. You're not leaving them. Not tonight." Harris's face was taut with concentration, sweat streaking through the grime on his forehead. He worked with deliberate precision, digging through layers of muscle, cursing softly as he probed for the lodged fragment. The sound of the knife scraping against splintered bone made Evelyn flinch, but she didn't loosen her grip. Outside, the storm slammed a branch against the window so hard it rattled the glass. Caleb spun, gun raised, breath sharp. Nothing came through, but the weight of being hunted pressed heavier than ever. Evelyn risked a glance at him, saw the haunted set of his jaw, and something in her chest twisted. She thought of all the years she had spent burying her own pain under silence. And now here was this man, looking just as wrecked, standing guard over a bleeding bear like his own life depended on it. Harris grunted, pulling the tweezers free for a second time, blood slicking his gloves. He muttered, "It's deep. One more push." Evelyn nodded, her grip tightening on the bear's paw. The mother's eyes fluttered open again, just for a moment, and Evelyn swore she saw something in them. Something human, something pleading. Her throat ached with the urge to sob, but she swallowed it back. She would not break, not now. Harris went in again, deeper this time, his knuckles white around the tool. A strangled roar erupted from the bear's chest, shaking the cot, rattling the lantern, making Evelyn's heart slam against her ribs. She leaned her weight into the bear's shoulder, holding her steady, whispering furiously now, fighting her own shaking arms. "You hold on. You hear me? You hold on." Harris twisted the tweezers, eyes narrowing, and with a wet snap, he pulled the bullet free. A warped chunk of lead slick with blood. For one eternal second, everything froze. The bear's chest rose in a shudder, then again, steadier this time. Evelyn felt it under her palm and almost collapsed with relief. Harris grabbed a strip of cloth, pressing it hard against the wound, hands moving fast to bandage, to tie, to seal what hope they could. Caleb let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for years. But then, just as Evelyn's heartbeat began to settle, a sound cut through the storm that made every hair on her neck stand on end. The crunch of boots in the mud. Slow, deliberate, right outside the door. Caleb's revolver snapped up, his jaw tightening. Harris froze, hands still pressed to the bear's wound, eyes darting toward the entrance. Evelyn's breath caught. The cubs whimpered under the cot, their tiny bodies pressed tight, sensing the tension. A shadow moved past the window, blocking the lantern light for a split second. Evelyn's pulse roared in her ears. The hunter's voice followed, low and cold, almost conversational. "You think you can steal my prize?" Caleb didn't answer. He stepped toward the door, boots silent on the creaking floor. Evelyn's chest constricted, torn between terror and fury. They had fought too hard, too long to let it end here. The bear shifted on the cot, letting out a low, rumbling sound, as if she too understood what was coming. The handle on the door rattled. Caleb braced himself, Harris's jaw set, reaching for the knife. Evelyn rose slowly, her hands still streaked with the bear's blood. Her eyes locked on that door as though sheer willpower might hold it shut. Outside, the boots stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any storm, heavy and endless, until suddenly the door splintered inward with a violent crash and the hunter burst into the room. Rifle raised, fury carved into his face. The next moments would decide everything, and there was no going back. The door burst open with a crack that echoed through the outpost like thunder, splinters flying across the floor. The hunter stormed in, soaked to the bone, rifle aimed square at Evelyn. His eyes were wild, pupils dilated, a mix of greed and rage that made Evelyn's stomach lurch. Caleb moved instantly, stepping into the line of fire, revolver steady, his voice sharp and cutting. "You don't want to do this." The hunter's lips curled into a bitter grin. "That bear is mine. You think you can patch her up and walk out like nothing happened? I bled for that shot." Harris edged closer to the cot, knife in hand, but the hunter's gaze flicked toward him, and the barrel swung with lethal precision. "Don't move." Harris froze, the blade hovering at his side, knuckles white. Evelyn's heart was a drum in her chest, pounding so hard she could barely think. She stepped forward despite every survival instinct screaming at her to stop. Her voice came out low and steady, soaked in fury. "She's not yours. She's alive because we refused to be like you." The hunter's laugh was harsh, almost amused. "You think you're a hero, lady? Out here, mercy gets you killed." The tension snapped like a wire. Caleb lunged, shoving the rifle aside as the hunter fired. The bullet tore through the wall, the sound deafening, smoke filling the lantern-lit room. Harris swung with the knife, catching the hunter's arm, and the rifle clattered to the floor. The hunter roared, slamming Harris back into the cot so hard the lantern shook, its flame flaring. Evelyn grabbed a length of broken chair leg, adrenaline flooding her veins, and swung it hard into the hunter's shoulder. He staggered, eyes blazing with disbelief that anyone would dare. The cubs shrieked from beneath the cot, the mother bear shifting with a groan that rumbled the floorboards. The hunter turned on Evelyn, shoving her back so violently she hit the wall and gasped for air. Caleb tackled him, the two men crashing to the floor, fists and elbows flying, grunts filling the room. Harris stumbled forward, knife raised, but then froze as a new sound ripped through the chaos. It was a roar, not loud at first, more like a deep vibration rolling through the walls, ancient and unstoppable. The hunter stopped mid-struggle, eyes darting toward the cot. The mother bear was rising, trembling but massive, bandaged shoulder bleeding through the cloth. Her eyes twin embers locked on the man who had tried to end her life. Her growl built into a roar so powerful it shook dust from the ceiling. The hunter scrambled backward, tripping over a chair, his hands clawing for the fallen rifle. Evelyn shouted, but her voice was lost in the storm of that sound, the raw, thunderous defiance of a creature that refused to die. The bear lunged forward, not with clumsy rage but with terrifying purpose, one massive paw sweeping the rifle away and slamming the hunter back into the doorframe with bone-rattling force. Caleb yanked Evelyn to her feet, both of them frozen by the sight. Harris stood rooted, blade still in his hand, eyes wide. The hunter gasped, pinned under the bear's shadow, staring up into eyes that burned with a grief and fury older than these woods. His own voice cracked, pleading now, but the bear did not strike again. Instead, she let out a low, trembling growl, stepping back just enough to free him. The hunter scrambled to his feet, terror etched across his face. He bolted through the shattered doorway, stumbling into the storm and disappearing into the black forest without a backward glance. The only sound left was the bear's ragged breathing, the hiss of rain on the lantern's glass, and Evelyn's own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The bear turned, eyes softening as she nudged her cubs, who squeaked and scrambled to her side. She limped toward the open door, pausing for a long, silent moment. Evelyn felt her chest ache as those golden eyes met hers one last time, a connection so pure and unspoken it cut through every scar she carried. Then the mother bear stepped into the rain, cubs at her heels, vanishing into the night with a dignity that felt almost holy. Inside the outpost, silence settled like snowfall. Harris lowered the knife, Caleb dropped his revolver, and Evelyn sank to her knees, tears and rainwater streaking down her face. Against every odd, every dark thought, they had seen something miraculous. A life spared, a wild heart unbroken. And as the storm raged on, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years surge through her chest like a pulse of light. Hope, fierce and alive, echoing in the emptiness the bear left behind.